All right, so I've rambled enough. So I guess it's time now that we check out the video about the Titanic. We're going to be doing two videos on the Titanic. The first is going to be a simple history video, which is going to give us a little bit of background for those of me that don't know too much about the Titanic outside of a couple videos I've watched in the past. And then we're going to be getting into the show You Are There, which is basically what I've built this stream around. That's the thing I want to do today more than anything. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So let's get started with the simple history thing and we'll have a little chit chat. Let's do it.
The sinking of the Titanic, 1912. The luxury British passenger liner RMS Titanic began construction on March 31, 1909 in the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, and was completed 3 years later in 1912. As one of three Olympic-class ocean liners, it was designed to be the largest luxury passenger ship in the world and would cost $7.5 million to build. It had a length of 882 feet 9 inches, or 269.1 meters, a height of 175 feet, or 53.3 meters, and a width of 92 feet 6 inches, or 28 meters, and it weighed 46,328 tons. Below the waterline was the orlop decks for cargo, and the tank top were the engines, boilers.
So in the previous week's post-show, but not really a post-show because we didn't have a mainstream, I watched two other videos about the Titanic. One was about hygiene, and the hygiene was questionable, and if you become a channel member, of course, you can check out the whole thing about that. And there was also a lot of discussion about the different classes on the Titanic. There's like a first, second, and third class. Third class makes up like a pretty significant number of people, and the conditions were not necessarily favorable. And then there's like this upper class and kind of like this upper middle second class that has a lot of the stuff that the first class has. So it's an interesting economic layout throughout the ship that I find fascinating.
Turbines and electrical generators were. At the very top was the boat deck, where the bridge and wheelhouse were, as well as the lifeboats. In between were the decks for passengers with first, second, and third class cabins. The level of luxury was so high that second class was comparable to first class on any other ship. The 2,240 passengers would be from all walks of life, from millionaires and celebrities to poor immigrants looking for a better life in America. The ship would act like a floating hotel, featuring a grand staircase which allowed first-class passengers to move from deck to deck, and had a domed skylight to allow natural light in. The ship also featured a gymnasium, dining saloons, a reading room, a barber shop, a squash court, a Turkish bath, and a swimming pool. The ship carried 20 out of a possible 64 light.
It had a lot of utilities, but of course the utilities are kind of restricted depending on what class you are. It's not like every third class person had access to the Turkish bath. So it's a lovely place if you have a lot going for you.
Lifeboats. Therefore, there were only enough for half the ship's population. However, this was within legal requirements. Lifeboats were only intended for carrying passengers to rescue ships and not keep the entire ship population afloat. As a result, the company who owned the Titanic, White Star Line, felt complacent enough to keep the number of lifeboats low so the deck wasn't cluttered. Many claimed the Titanic was unsinkable because its hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments. It was said that if up to 4 of these flooded, the ship would still stay buoyant. All of these qualities drew the press to frequently talk about the new passenger liner. Disaster. In the morning of April 10, 1912, passengers began boarding the Titanic in Southampton, England, with large crowds gathering to watch the ship depart. At noon, the Titanic set sail under command of Captain Edward Smith, beginning her maiden voyage. It would stop at Cherbourg, France, and then Queenstown, Ireland, to pick up more passengers, and then began its journey across the North Atlantic Ocean towards New York City. On April 14, 1912, warnings were coming in of icebergs from other liners, so Captain Smith had plotted a new course and continued to steam at full speed, which was standard practice. As it became dark, the temperatures were dropping to below freezing, and there was no moonlight or waves, making it difficult to see approaching icebergs. At 11:40 p.m. ship's time, the ship's lookout, Frederick Fleet, spotted an iceberg from the crow's nest. He rang the warning bell and telephoned the officers at the ship's bridge, shouting, "Iceberg right ahead!" Fleet had spotted the iceberg with his eyes, as the crow's nest binoculars were locked away. The key's owner, Officer David Blair, had been removed from the Titanic's crew at the last minute and forgot to hand over the key. The officers on the bridge quickly turned the ship away from the iceberg, but it was too late. The Titanic grazed the iceberg along its side, ripping several holes in its hull below the waterline, with fragments of ice hitting the deck. At first, everyone felt relief. The lookouts and the passengers didn't even feel the collision. 11:50 p.m. Captain Smith and the ship architect, Thomas Andrews, went to inspect the damage. They knew the ship would start sinking, and by this time, 6 of the watertight compartments at the front of the ship's hull were already breached and began flooding. 12 a.m. The captain sent out a distress call over the radio in the hopes that there were other ships nearby and gave the order for the Titanic's passengers to board the lifeboats. He knew there were only enough for half the population of the Titanic. At 12:25, the lifeboats began their loading, with women and children first, as this was the protocol at sea. Many passengers still did not understand what was going on, and confusion and disorganization meant that the first lifeboat to leave had only 28 women and children aboard, when it could carry 65 people. First Officer Murdoch took the order to mean women and children first, then men if they were there, while Second Officer Lightoller took it to mean women and children only. The Carpathia, which was 58 miles away.
Yeah, like if it's a case of like women and children, but you can fit some men that are there, you take them. You don't turn them away. Like if they can also fit on it. I don't. That's such a weird bit of confusion. I understand like the degree of panic they must have been dealing with. Definitely would lead to a little bit more confusion and delay.
Heard the distress call and began sailing towards the sinking Titanic to rescue the passengers. Distress flares were shot into the sky to help locate the sinking Titanic. By 1 a.m., with the lower decks flooding, the bow of the ship began to sink below the water's surface. Water was pouring in 15 times faster than it could be pumped out, which was not helped by the fact that many of the passengers had left their portholes open. The unsupported stern and its propellers rose out of the water into the air. Panic and chaos set in as lifeboats were running out. Some people pushed their way to the lifeboats, while others accepted their fate and stayed behind.
In the other post show that we did, where we talked about the Titanic stuff, one of the videos was also a simple history video, and it was specifically about the musicians, because there's the famous story of the violinist who played as the ship went down, and I wasn't even sure if that was like a real story or not, or if that was just something poetic and like a beautiful visual perpetuated by media and movies and stuff, because I haven't even seen Titanic the movie. I don't know. I'm sure it's a fantastic movie. People generally seem to enjoy it. But I hadn't even seen it, so I didn't know what any of that could have been based on, or what that movie interjected into the narrative that may have confused people or not. But that ended up being true. It's a very interesting video.
Or gave up their spots to more vulnerable passengers. Many did not want to survive the disaster and be branded a coward back home. By 2:05 a.m., the last lifeboat had left, but 1,500 people were left on the ship. The deck was now at a steep height, and many passengers fell into the freezing, icy waters. At 2:17 a.m., the captain announced, "Every man for himself." The stern gave way under the pressure and broke off, with the front half disappearing to the bottom of the ocean. At some point, Captain Smith went down with the ship, a maritime tradition that the captain would do in accepting responsibility for all on board. Some say he went to the wheelhouse and waited for the end, while others say he committed suicide using a pistol. The stern,
honestly, that's what I would
into
do.
the water's surface, became level
Drowning
and
sounds
soon
scary.
started to fill with water, sinking nearly 4 kilometers beneath the surface of the ocean. Many died as a result of drowning, but the main cause of death was hypothermia in the freezing.
I don't remember the violinist's name. That's kind of a shame because I really enjoyed the video on it. There was like a whole band of people, and I can't recall his name, but it was very interesting. The video was basically a biography of like one of the main people in the band. It didn't necessarily cover everybody.
Waters, which occurred within minutes. Some of the lifeboats returned, but only 4 survivors were found. At 3:30 a.m., the distress flares from the Titanic were spotted by the Carpathia. The Carpathia arrived to the scene at 4:10 a.m. and picked up the lifeboats. Only 705 passengers would survive the disaster, with over 1,500 people losing their lives. Subscribe and click
The Titanic is such an interesting thing, and I don't know how people viewed the Titanic for like the longest time, like, because by the time I'm aware of it, we are so far removed from it actually being like this international trauma that I don't know if I can fully appreciate the tragedy of the Titanic. I think it's just one of those things that is just barely removed enough. Like, even in the United States, I think of like massive national trauma and stuff like that. We have 9/11, which kind of took the place of Pearl Harbor. Like, I can't fully appreciate Pearl Harbor as somebody who mostly grew up in like a post 9/11 world. We didn't really think about national tragedy in I guess the vein of like Pearl Harbor. We thought about 9/11. 9/11 was our go-to thing. So I guess it might just be a generational thing, but like I don't know if I fully understand how big of it clearly was a big deal, but like I don't know if I have the capacity to fully appreciate how big of a deal this was for so long. So that video was more just an excuse to get a little bit more background. Honestly, most of that I kind of got. I kind of got most of that. But it was to get a little bit of background before we get started on You Are There. And let me just pull up You Are There right now. You Are There is... Sorry, I got a couple minutes into it. So You Are There. I have to give a little bit of background as to what this is. So this is a television show from the 1950s during the McCarthy era in the United States. And if you're not familiar with the McCarthy era, they're cracking down on communism and communists in entertainment and stuff, which resulted in a lot of communist writers, and there were a lot of them, a lot of communist writers and entertainers being blacklisted, which meant you were not supposed to employ these people. They're bad, they're communists, they're not supposed to find work. However, plenty of them still... You shut your mouth. Plenty of them still did. He doesn't like when I talk about communists. I don't know if he's anti or pro, but he doesn't like that word coming out of my mouth. So in a lot of cases, communist writers who were blacklisted ended up finding work anyway. They would do it under pseudonyms, fake names, and 3 of the writers on the show You Are There were blacklisted communist writers. And while you don't see as much of the communist ideology seeping through into this show, you see a lot of themes of people being oppressed for their ideas. We watched something on a post show a while ago about the American Revolution. And of course, there's an element of people being oppressed for their ideas there, but they cover, I think there's an episode on like the Salem witch trials. I don't know if the video of it still exists, but I think I think it happened. And I don't know if that theme carries over into the sinking of the Titanic. So the layout is that it's like a news show taking place in the past. And this is kind of before the common news show format had fully taken form, which is interesting as news shows are just starting to emerge and look pretty much the same as they do today. We have a lot of the same people producing the news of the time working on this. You'll find the name Walter Cronkite to be pretty familiar, I'm sure. While he's doing the actual news, he's also doing this show, which I think is really interesting. So let's get it started. You'll like it, I'm sure. I haven't seen this episode, but I've seen one other episode.
The sinking of the Titanic.
So this is the 1950s, so it's a lot more fresh to these people, the Titanic, than it would be to me.
You are there.
Walter Cronkite reporting, April 14th, 1912. A new era has begun in ocean transportation as the famous British White Star liner Titanic begins its first run across the Atlantic Ocean. The biggest, fastest, most luxurious liner in the world. The Titanic is expected not only to break all existing speed records for passenger ships, but also to provide a model for future ocean travel in terms of comfort and, above all, of safety. Already dubbed the unsinkable ship, the Titanic is a marvel of marine engineering and craftsmanship. With its launching, man has taken another giant step forward in his conquest of space. 4 days ago, the Titanic left South...
So he's telling this as if it's happening at the time. However, this is recorded in the 1950s. It's like so authentic to a news broadcast at the time that it's kind of, during these segments, it's kind of hard to tell the difference, but they actually do have like kind of like an on-the-scene reporting element of the show that I think really makes it interesting.
Southampton, England, headed for New York City. At this moment, she's on the high seas. Well, this first trip is naturally a feeling-out voyage, and it is doubtful whether the great ship will be pushed to her limits. Still, the
Hey, Neron, it's good to have you.
For the trip will assure for its owners the fame and fortune predicted for the Titanic. Several reporters are on board the ship now, ready to bring you the latest reports of what may well be an epic-making transatlantic trip. All things are as they were then, except...
You are there.
It's so cheesy. I love the cheesiness of the time.
This is Fleet Roberts on the bridge of the Titanic somewhere in the North Atlantic. This is our fifth night out since leaving Southampton, and the voyage has been as pleasant as it's been uneventful. The weather has been very clear, although rather unusually cold for this time of year, and the ship has been making extremely good time. No one is predicting a record yet, but no one will be surprised if one is made. The officer you see there is Captain E.J. Smith, master of the Titanic. With him is Lord Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line, the company that, as you know, owns the...
And this is interesting. It's in a world, because they'll have like these cameras going around and they'll have the people interviewing the people at the time, which is not as jarring here, even though it's the 1912s, and it would not have looked visually like this if they did something like this, because like the technology wasn't there. But they do the same format even in the American Revolution stuff. They have like the news interviewer going around and asking questions to the local loyalist or the patriot sympathizer or whatever, and they ask and they try to get the opinions of the ordinary people who were around at the time. It's truly a fascinating format, and honestly, I think the world would be ready for something like this, maybe with like a humorous touch to it, but I think this is something that they could do again.
Titanic. Captain Smith, sir, is the Titanic performing up to your expectation?
If anything, beyond them.
Do you think you'll break the record?
Perhaps, perhaps not.
I myself would be surprised if it were not broken. You know how much of a run we've made in the past 24 hours? 500 miles, sir. 500 miles.
And 26.
526 miles, and we'll do more tomorrow, I promise you that. Unless, of course, the weather gets a bit sticky. Fog, you know, or a storm.
Or ice.
Have there been icebergs reported, sir?
A few. We don't usually get them this far south, but this spring has been somewhat exceptional, I must say.
Why is that, sir?
Well, it all goes back 2 years when they had an unusually warm summer up north. Broke off whole islands of ice, I'm told. And, naturally, they drift their way down here. But they move so slowly, it has taken them up until now to get here.
Would they be much of a problem, sir?
Oh, we travel so much faster than they do that, of course, we could get out of their way.
Speaking of being faster, could you tell me some of the other characteristics of the Titanic, some of the features which set her apart from other ships?
Well, it's hard to know where to begin. Roughly 46,000 tons, 882 feet long.
That makes her the longest and largest ship afloat, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And she's also the strongest. Heavy keel, reinforced inner and outer bottom.
And haven't I heard something about a most efficient pumping system?
Very unusual. Very powerful pumps. Could pump enormous quantities of water out of it. And enough piping so that it could be led into any area in which she might be taking water. As if she would, of course.
Could you tell me something about the bulkheads? I understand they're far superior to those on any other ship.
How many bulkheads does the Titanic have?
15, my lord. Transverse bulkheads, that is.
Their watertight doors are electrically controlled, dividing her into, how many watertight compartments, Captain?
16, my lord.
Controlled by these switches in here, and so proportioned that any two of the largest could be completely flooded without affecting the ship's floating power.
So isn't this like such a cool format for a history show? Like, I'm just astounded that this exists and like it's so hard to find episodes of it. So many of the episodes have been lost to time. So historian Eric Christensen, who focuses on cultural history, wrote a book that talked a lot about the show You Are There. Some episodes he just wasn't able to find because they just don't exist anymore. Nobody kept them. He was able to find like descriptions of them and a handful of episodes that exist online and all that. But it's a remarkable show. The fact that this exists and so many people don't know about it, it's absolutely insane. It's really cool.
We could strike Westminster Abbey itself and float home under our own steam. But me no buts. You are on an unsinkable ship, my boy. There's a man on board wants to meet you. One of our stockholders. I think it might be wise.
Well, you'll excuse us, won't you?
Todd Hunter is in the main first-class salon with some of the distinguished passengers making this trip. Come in, Todd Hunter.
The roster of passengers on this maiden voyage of the Titanic reads like a who's who of both British and American society. That's Colonel John Jacob Astor over there with his young bride. With him is Major Archibald Butt, personal aide to President Taft. Colonel Astor, what do you think of the Titanic?
Magnificent. Everything they said she was. Britannia rules the waves, eh, Bud?
Do you think America will be able to match it, Colonel?
Beg your pardon, what'd you say?
I say, do you think America will be able to match it?
Why, I imagine in due time, but right now the British are way ahead of us. On the seas, that is. It is a magnificent ship. You hardly feel you're at sea at all. And if you stay inside, well, it's like never leaving the plaza. Isn't it, darling?
Oh, I think she's just beautiful.
That's the word, beautiful. They do a beautiful job, the British. You have to hand it to them.
Thank you, Colonel and Mrs. Astor. And that is Mr. and Mrs. Strauss. As you know, Mr. Strauss is head of the famous New York department store, R.H. Macy & Company. Having a good trip, Mr. Strauss?
Delightful. Couldn't imagine a better one.
Are your quarters comfortable? No complaints about the food?
I haven't slept as well in years, or eaten as well either. Except, of course, when you've done the cooking.
Pay no attention to him. I'm a terrible cook.
Pay no attention to her. Best cook I ever saw. Why, I married her.
Do you think the Titanic will start a trend toward liners of this size?
Well, speaking as a businessman, of course, not as a sailor, the trend in everything is towards size. Everything's getting bigger these days, and better, too. Just look at the buildings going up. Why, 20 stories high is nothing. No telling where they'll stop.
So when it comes to the way this show seems to communicate things, I don't know if, like, these specific ideas come from any of the specific individuals that you see. What it seems to try to communicate is larger cultural trends and ideas. Like in the American Revolution one, it doesn't always give you like a specific person who believed a specific thing, but it's trying to, I guess, symbolize trends of feelings that people tend to feel. This guy would be symbolizing a trend of optimism towards like technological progress and sailing, and like the just the confidence in how far things have gone, while they'd have like a loyalist or whatever in the American Revolution one who will symbolize a broad idea of what loyalists tended to believe and that sort of stuff. So I don't fully know if like any of these specific peoples had statements where they said these specific things, but in a lot of ways it's more to make the bigger, I guess, draw the bigger picture rather than make the specific points from what I've seen so far.
Isn't that dangerous, dear?
Not if you know what you're doing.
Why should things be so big?
Well, in ships, in general, the bigger they are, the faster they go.
But why should they be so fast?
Oh, there you go again. Right to the heart of the matter. You should have been a lawyer, my dear. But you can still quote me on the Titanic. It's a miracle, and I'm grateful to be on it.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Strauss. The man just coming in from the deck is Frederick Hoyt of New York. Mr. Hoyt is the well-known naval architect. Oh, Mr. Hoyt.
Yes?
May I ask you a few questions? As a designer and builder of ships yourself, would you tell us, please, your impressions of the Titanic?
Well, she's quite magnificent, of course. I was just having another look around her. She's absolutely the latest word.
Do you think she merits the title, the unsinkable ship?
Well, I imagine the Titanic comes as close to it as anything on the sea ever has.
Do you have any reservations about anything?
Well, there's a French restaurant, a palm court, Turkish baths, electric baths, squash courts. There doesn't seem to be anything that anyone would want.
I was talking about the ship itself, sir.
Oh, you put me in a difficult position, being in the same line of business, as it were.
Any comment at all that you'd have?
The Titanic has every modern improvement and every possible safety device. Her chances of ever getting into any serious trouble are extremely remote.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyt. Cleet Roberts has some information now from the bridge. Come in, Cleet Roberts.
There have been a few developments up here that may be of interest in showing the operation of the Titanic, particularly when any special precautions have to be taken. We are now entering a great field of ice plotted by the ship's navigators as some 70 miles long and 12 miles wide. No ice has yet been seen, but Mr. Murdoch, the chief mate who has relieved Captain Smith on the bridge here, is ready to receive any warnings from the lookout up above in the crow's nest. Mr. Murdoch, how will you be informed if and when ice is sighted?
3 bells from the lookout. He has a telephone up there, too. He can pick it up right here.
Does he have enough visibility? There doesn't seem to be any moon.
Oh, it's clear enough. You'd be surprised how far you can see from up there. And you can see better without the moon. There's no reflection.
Well, what do the navigators base their calculations on if no ice has been seen?
Oh, reports from other ships mostly.
So the interviewer does have sort of a the benefit of hindsight, being able to ask questions that people may not necessarily be worried as much about in the actual moment. So that is one thing that it's going to be like, okay, the interviewer, the amount of questions they have, the interviewer, in like an honest interview during the time, a lot of them probably would have been caught up in the optimism, I would think. But this one, this is a quality journalist being sent into the past right there and asking all the tough questions, kind of knowing what's going to happen.
We've been getting them all day. One from the Coronia this morning, others from the Mesaba, the Baltic, the America. Also, the other ships, when they spot an ice field, they tell all the other ships about it.
Then the temperature dropped 11 degrees from 6:30 to 9 tonight. That doesn't mean ice. I'm in the wrong business.
Have any other precautions been taken, such as slowing down?
2 hours ago, we were making 22 knots. We're making 24 and a half now.
Isn't that dangerous with ice around?
We maintain course and speed as long as visibility is good.
But,
What would you have us do, mister? Come in late on the maiden voyage? What good is it building the biggest and best? He also isn't going to be the fastest. That's no way to make £1 million.
But if there's ice already reported...
If there's ice, we'll see it. And if we don't see it, well, mister, this ship is unsinkable, isn't it? Don't you read the newspapers? Haven't you read about it?
Oh, we're getting the news.
Ice start dead ahead. How to stop it? How to stop it?
Put down the engine.
Full of stern.
Close all watertight doors.
Watertight doors.
What was that?
Iceberg, sir.
Close all watertight doors, then.
Doors closed, sir.
Good. I'll go below and see what damage there is. Good thing we didn't hit head on.
Yes, sir.
And if I didn't watch the other video, I'd be like, oh, it's like nothing even happened. Because you don't get any sort of that impact, that sort of, you don't get the shaky cam, you don't get any of the stuff that people would do probably in a more modern take on this. Because it was so big that they wouldn't have even felt it. So, like, I would have complained about that, like, oh, they didn't really even give me any sign that they'd hit anything. But now I know, oh, they wouldn't have had any sign that they hit anything. That's interesting.
Go ahead. You're back on course.
Back to course, sir.
No need to get alarmed. You saw it wasn't much.
Harlow Wilcox is in the wireless room to show us the workings of this new invention that has so greatly added to man's safety and ability to communicate. Come in, Harlow Wilcox.
The wireless is a comparatively new thing on ships, as you know, and it's rare to find a wireless operator of advanced years. The young man here is John Phillips, the Titanic's chief operator, who has just come on duty. He and his assistant, Harold Bride, have been very busy on this maiden voyage. Mr. Phillips, what kind of messages are you sending or receiving now?
Mostly personal or business messages from the passengers to the States.
Are you in touch with other ships as well?
We gab about a bit.
Here, gab a bit with these.
Right you are, Steward. I say, did you feel us hit anything just now? Seems to me we shivered as if we'd brushed something.
You'd shiver, too, if you were down in that water. Just like the middle of winter out there.
Seems to me we're slowing as well.
Mr. Phillips, we struck an iceberg. Stand by to send out a call for assistance.
So he felt
But don't do
something,
anything
just
until
not
you
much.
get word from me. It may not be necessary. Steward, you stand by here for further orders.
Yes, sir.
We stopped.
Well, whatever it was, can't be more than a scratch. They just got the wind up because she's new and all.
I hope you're right.
We probably ran into some poor old whale, and they're having a board of directors meeting
Phillips,
about it.
send out the international distress signal immediately.
Yes, sir.
Todd Hunter is on deck now. Come in, Todd Hunter. The passengers here in first class were all alerted a little while ago and are now coming up to take their place in the lifeboats. No one knows exactly yet what's happened, but no one seems particularly alarmed. Seems inconceivable that such a slight bump, if indeed that's what it was, could have damaged a ship like the Titanic. Those of the passengers who aren't annoyed at being hauled out of bed in the middle of a cold night are taking the whole procedure as some kind of stunt. Oh, Colonel Astor. Colonel Astor.
Yes.
Do you know
Oh,
what's
did
happening?
they not initially take it seriously?
Some sort of drill, I guess.
Oh,
Must be our ship.
I guess that makes sense. They're so confident.
This, are we? Women and children only, sir. Well, isn't there room for everyone else? Women and children, madam. That's all I was told. Aren't there enough boats?
Attention, crew.
Why aren't there enough boats?
Don't worry your head about the boats. Certainly there are enough boats. Why, it's merely an elementary precaution that's always taken. Women and children first. It's kind of a tradition, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Old Captain Smith, he's a stickler for tradition. I'll be in one of the other boats right behind you. Now get in, honey. Don't worry.
But why? There isn't any danger, is there? It said the Titanic couldn't sink.
So it can't.
You're absolutely sure, aren't you?
Darling, doesn't matter a tinker's damn whether I'm sure or not. What's important is that Lloyd's of London insured this ship for the lowest marine rate it's ever given. Does that convince you?
Well, I suppose it's Lloyd. There'll be another boat for you, won't there, darling?
I can't see anything but boats. I ought to be able to get one of them. be along as fast as I can. Bye, Don.
He's not going to make it.
Get that boat pulled clear as soon as it's free.
Captain Smith. Captain Smith.
Yes?
Is the ship badly damaged?
Yes, it is.
Can you tell us what happened?
We collided with an iceberg, hit the part that is underwater. I've ordered all passengers into the lifeboats. Watch those falls when you lower away. See it doesn't get fouled up in the hook. Mr. Hoyt, number 2 boat on the starboard side will be ready to lower in 5 minutes. I suggest you put your wife into it.
My wife's boat was just lowered. What's the damage?
We're ripped from stem to stern.
Below the waterline?
Yes, from the forepeak to number 5 boiler room. Slashed as though you'd done it with a knife. The gash must be some 300 foot long. And 14 foot of water in the forward compartment within the first 10 minutes.
Thomas can't take care of it?
No. You'd better get into a boat yourself.
Regardless of your boat number, proceed to starboard boat deck.
Is my wife's boat still close to the ship?
I believe so, sir. But you can't tell them there's anything really wrong. The boats are full.
I love... So it goes from a news thing to them just like acting out full scenes. Occasionally it kind of escapes the newscast format a little bit, and you just sort of forget that the camera is watching. And that's like the one element that kind of escapes it being like an authentic recreation of a news show. Like when the couple is having their conversation, you kind of forget that the camera is there, which I kind of like how fluid it is with that. I think yeah. Angeimer, I'm sorry. I know I think I got your name last week, but now I've forgotten how to say it. You're saying how immersive it is. It really is incredibly immersive how they do that. Like it goes from the news show, becomes them acting out a scene, and then goes back like, and it's like, oh yeah, we're watching a thing. This isn't just playing out in front of us. It really lives up to its title. You are there.
In a way, half empty. Some of them.
I'll give you a hand with the other boats. You'll probably need it. I advise you to get in the boat.
Panic has set in. Big
Harlow
time.
Wilcox has gone to other parts of the ship to see how the evacuation is going on. Come in, Harlow Wilcox.
I'm down here in the steerage of the Titanic.
The film style
where an
kind of
attempt is
changed a
being
little
made
there
get the
to
steerage passengers out of the lifeboats. The seaman
show
assigned
the
to this
chaos.
job seems to be having some difficulty.
Look, I'm trying to give it to you straight and simple.
The ship's sinking. It's going down, see? And all the women and children I want out to the boat. Out to the boat. See? See? No. Look, the ship's in trouble. Trouble. Sick. Sick. Oh.
This guy's ham levels are off the charts.
That speaks English, Mum. Hi, lady. Now, listen. Look, the ship's in trouble. It's sinking. It's going down, see? And I want all the women and children out to the boats. Too late.
Better get a move on, Jocko. She ain't got much longer to go.
Well, what am I going to do with these? I can't make them understand me.
That's their lookout. You better get topside before you go down with them.
What, is it as bad as that?
Mortal, Jocko.
Riley.
Mortal.
Now, listen. Listen, this ship is going to go down any minute. Right down, see? Down. Yeah, down. Huh? Don't you understand? Come here. Look, I want you kids and your women all out to the boats before it's too late. Do you understand? Don't you understand? No,
Don't you understand?
The time's running out. Now, come on. Here. Oh, lady. I'm not going to hurt you, kid. I'm trying to save you. Can't you get it through your head?
Better get a move on. The number 6 boiler room's flooded.
6 boiler.
Back to Todd Hunter on deck. Come in, Todd Hunter.
are still pulling away from the ship. Some of the passengers are beginning to realize now this is no joke, that the Titanic is really in trouble. But there is no panic, and the evacuation proceeds quietly.
UAVs at once about number 6.
Captain Smith? Oh, Captain Smith. Are other ships coming to your rescue?
A ship has been sighted a few miles off to port. She hasn't responded to our wirelesses yet, but we're sending up rockets. She should see them soon.
Have any responded to the wireless?
Yes, a few. The Carpathia is the nearest. She should be here in a few hours.
Will that be time enough?
So I know that some people who didn't make it out on the lifeboats did end up surviving, and they were like pulled out of the ocean. But for many, it just wasn't soon enough. But I know that some, that just because you didn't get onto a lifeboat didn't mean that you didn't survive. There was opportunity to be saved. It's just your chances weren't wonderful.
We'll have to see. Yes, Phillips.
My assistant's on the quay, sir.
Good.
We've got the Frankfurt now. She's a German ship, sir. Also the Mount Temple and the Baltic. They're all on the way.
Any further news from the Carpathia?
Still coming full speed, sir. They're doing the best they can.
Good.
Just one thing, sir, if it can be done. There's a terrible amount of steam being let off.
Well, the engineers are reducing steam. We can hardly afford any explosions at this point.
I realize that, sir, but the signals are rather faint now. We need all the quiet we can get, otherwise we can't hear them.
Very well. I'll see what can be done to decrease the noise.
Thank you, sir.
Good.
I'll take care of it, sir, but I wanted to tell you the two forward compartments are completely flooded. They're using the emergency dynamos now. I've ordered the firemen out, but the engineers insist on staying. They say that if they keep the pumps going all along, that we'll stay afloat a bit longer.
How long do they give her?
Oh, an hour, maybe two, sir.
Hardly time enough for the Carpathia to get here. Has that ship to port altered course any? Well, get the boats away and see that they're all full. And remember, women and children first.
Very well, sir.
Women and children.
We'll return you to the deck in just a moment. Meanwhile, for coverage of the activities below,
Women and
here is
children
Dick
first.
Joy in one of the engine rooms.
This is Dick Joy. We're just inside the bulkhead.
Why is that kid just carrying a little toy sailboat?
This is Dick Joy. We're just inside the bulkhead of engine room 7, and we'll try to find out what the situation is. You, sir.
Is the news
May we
team
ask
gonna
you
go
a few
down?
questions?
Yes.
Could you tell us how things are going down here?
Well, we're not flooded in this compartment yet, if that's what you mean.
Well, just why are you letting steam off from the boilers?
To prevent an explosion. If there's a full rate of steam and cold seawater breaks through and hits a boiler, it'll blow sky high. That would send us to the bottom class.
Didn't Captain Smith order all you engineers to go above?
It wasn't exactly an order. We knew we had to keep the pressure down, and the pumps had to be manned.
Well, then you feel there's still a chance to save the ship?
Not a chance. But with the pumps out of operation, she'd make
That's kind of an unsung hero of this, like buying people just a little bit more time. That probably made the difference between a lot of the people who were able to be rescued or not. This is like an element that you probably wouldn't even think about. I'm really going after my fingers right now.
This way, we may be able to keep it afloat for an hour or so. Give them a chance to get most of the passengers off. Or until help arrives.
Well, how will you know when to go above yourselves for your own safety?
Don't worry about me. Excuse me.
That's all from engine room 7. And again, we return you to the main deck.
I want you to get in this boat. There's no sense in you staying here.
No.
I'll be all right. There's no need to worry about me. You're being very foolish.
I won't leave you. After all this time together, I wouldn't know what to do without you.
But it's just being sensible.
Aww.
Would you
It's a
want
nice
to go
mix of
inside
history and like
sit down?
real drama. I feel for them.
Well, Mr. Hoyt?
Well, Captain, looks cold down there.
It is.
Well, at least it will give me some sort of a chance. I don't suppose you... No. Stupid of me. Sorry. Well, goodbye, Captain.
Good luck, Mr. Hoyt.
Thank you. Goodbye, Mr. Murdoch.
Last posted down, sir.
Good. Is the ship's orchestra up on deck?
Yes.
Have them play something if they're up to it, please, Mr. Murdoch.
Okay.
Captain Smith.
Yeah, when learning about the orchestra, I wasn't sure. I don't know if like he's the one who made the order for that to happen, or if this is just like their way of transitioning to that. If this is just a transitionary tool from a filmmaker's perspective. From what I watched, I don't think they said that the captain ordered the orchestra to continue playing, but that still might have happened. It's not really as much there's no orders anymore. It's just requests at this point.
Yes, steward?
Passenger on B deck, I wish to report, sir.
Report? What for?
Smashing in company property, sir. Breaking down doors. Pulling mattresses off beds. Says he's going to make some sort of a raft with them. Well, I tell you, sir, I'm responsible for that, and the regulation says that any...
Steward.
Yes, sir.
Your devotion to your company is admirable. I shall always remember it.
Thank you, sir.
And now, I suggest you do something about leaving the ship before she sinks.
Sinks?
Exactly.
But I'm responsible to the company, sir.
Yes, steward. So am I. You think the orchestra could play as a hymn, Mr. Murdoch?
Undoubtedly, sir.
You seem to understand the situation fairly well.
Yes.
How about the rockets, Mr. Murdoch?
We've sent up the last of them, sensor. There's nothing more we can do.
No, I don't suppose there is. Well, I shall go up to the bridge. Goodbye, Mr. Murdoch.
Goodbye, Captain.
Hours after scraping the side of the iceberg, the Titanic sank to the bottom of the sea. She went quietly, her bow dipping deeper and deeper into the water until her stern stood straight up in the air. Then gently and gracefully, she slid beneath the waves while the horrified survivors watched from the half-empty lifeboats. 2 hours later, the SS Carpathia came on the scene and took aboard the survivors 712 passengers and crew members. Going down with the ship were 1,517 men, women, and children. The sinking of the unsinkable Titanic broke over the Western world like an earthquake. Investigations were immediately held both in the United States and Great Britain, but no blame ever was really assessed. Certified to carry more than 3,000 persons, the Titanic had lifeboats for only 1,100. Yet the irony of the disaster was that not even these were filled, so confident were the passengers in the myth of the unsinkable ship. The other tragic irony was that throughout that terrible night, another ship, the SS Californian, lay just a few miles away with their radio operator off duty, deaf to the wireless signals tapped out by the stricken
yeah, I've heard about that.
of the distress rockets sent up by the Titanic. The only tangible result of the tragedy was that a system of ice patrols was instigated for the North Atlantic to warn ships of the ice danger. But it came too late to save the greatest ship of its day, the noble and ill-fated Titanic. What sort of a day was it? A day like all days, filled with those events that alter and illuminate our time. And you were there.
A man stand.
There we go. So that is You Are There. That's the name of the show. If you guys are at all interested in it, there are other episodes online you can find. I know you can find the one on the American Revolution because I've already watched it for the channel members. And if you want to watch that one, become a channel member. I might part with that one eventually. Okay, there's one on the Death of Socrates. And if you guys are down with it, I'd like to do that one next week. But from there, I don't know. I'm going to have to like look a little bit harder to find some of the other ones. But the Death of Socrates, that one, that really does fall within the norms of the series, because it does have the theme of people being oppressed for their beliefs. It's these blacklisted communist writers, kind of like their ability to work is being shut down by a system around them, and they decide they're going to display other figures in history who had been oppressed for their beliefs. Socrates is like the perfect example of that. So I think doing Socrates will probably give you a perfect idea of what this show was more like. That one was a little different. That one was a little different. It was very well done. But it doesn't have that political commonality that a lot of the other episodes do have. Though I do think it was still very, very fun. So next week, I will add the Death of Socrates to the playlist, and we'll be doing it on Social Stud Live number 9. And I'll see from there if there are any other episodes laying around somewhere. They don't seem to be on YouTube, so I might have to look elsewhere, but it's very possible I'll be able to find some more episodes. I can reach out to Dr. Christensen and see if he knows where I can find some other ones. Since he studied cultural history during the time and wrote heavily about this show, he could probably help me out with that if there are other episodes to be found. So, we'll see.